They called me the Family Disgrace. Little did they know, I was about to become their worst nightmare and their biggest lesson. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson, and at 72 years old, I'm finally ready to tell you the story that changed everything. A story of betrayal, resilience, and the sweetest revenge you could ever imagine. It all started on a cold December morning in 1952. I was just 25 then, married to my childhood sweetheart Harold, and we were struggling to make ends meet in our tiny apartment above Murphy's General Store. Harold worked double shifts at the steel mill, and I took in washing and mending from the wealthy families on Elm Street. We had nothing but love and dreams. My family, well, they had different ideas about what my life should look like. "Dorothy, you're embarrassing us," my sister Margaret would say, her pearl necklace glinting as she adjusted her fur coat. "Look at you, washing other people's dirty laundry like some common servant." My brother Charles was even worse. He'd visit our cramped apartment and shake his head disapprovingly. "Father left us all some money when he passed, Dorothy. But you and Harold, you're just throwing it all away on foolish dreams. Why don't you get a proper job at the bank like respectable people?" You see, my family came from old money. Not rich, but comfortable. When our father died, he left each of us $3,000, a fortune in those days. My siblings used their inheritance to buy nice houses, fancy cars, and secure positions in the community. They expected me to do the same. But Harold and we had a different vision. "Dorothy," Harold would say, holding my work-worn hands in his, "one day we're going to own something. Not just work for someone else, but actually own it. Build something that lasts." While my family mocked us for living paycheck to paycheck, Harold and I were quietly saving every penny. We ate beans and rice for dinner, patched our clothes instead of buying new ones, and walked everywhere to save on bus fare. We were building something they couldn't see, a foundation for the future. The real trouble started during Christmas dinner in 1954. I'll never forget sitting at my mother's mahogany dining table, wearing my one good dress, a navy blue number I'd sewn myself from fabric remnants. The chandelier cast expensive shadows across the faces of my family members. Margaret with her perfectly curled hair and ruby earrings, Charles in his tailored suit and gold pocket watch, my younger brother William showing off his new Buick keys. And then there was me, with my calloused hands and humble presence. "Dorothy, dear," my mother said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We've been talking, and we think it's time you and Harold faced reality. This lifestyle of yours isn't working." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "Mother's right. You're nearly 30 now, and what do you have to show for it? You're still living in that awful apartment, taking in other people's washing. It's beneath our family name." Charles leaned back in his chair, looking every bit the successful businessman he believed himself to be. "I've spoken to Mr. Patterson at the bank. He's willing to give Harold a position as a clerk. And Dorothy, there's an opening for a secretary at the insurance office. Steady work, decent pay, respectability." I felt Harold's hand squeeze mine under the table. We'd dreamed of this moment, not the intervention, but the opportunity to finally tll them about our plans. "Actually," I said quietly, "Harold and I have been working on something." The table fell silent. William actually laughed. "Working. On what?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp with skepticism. "Another one of your get-rich-quick schemes?" Harold cleared his throat. "We've been saving money, and we're planning to buy a small business. Nothing fancy, but something we can build together." The explosion of laughter that followed still rings in my ears today. "A business?" Charles wiped tears from his eyes. "You two can barely afford shoes and you want to run a business." "Dorothy, sweet child," my mother said, reaching across the table to pat my hand like I was a confused little girl. Businesses require capital, real money, education, connections. You have none of those things. We have determination, I replied, but my voice was barely a whisper. Determination doesn't pay bills, William said smugly. Face facts, Dorothy. You married a mill worker, and you're a washerwoman. That's your station in life. Accept it. If you're enjoying this story of family drama and unexpected revelations, please hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. That night, Harold and I walked home in silence through the snow-covered streets. When we finally reached our little apartment, I collapsed into his arms and cried like I hadn't cried since childhood. They think we're failures. I sobbed into his work shirt. Dorothy, Harold said, lifting my chin to look into his eyes. They don't know what we're capable of, but we do. And someday, we're going to prove it. Little did I know that someday would come sooner than either of us expected. 3 weeks later, Harold came home from the mill with news that changed everything. Dorothy, sit down, he said, his eyes bright with excitement. What is it? Old. Pete Thompson is selling his delivery business, the one that supplies groceries to all the big houses on Maple Street. He wants to retire, and he's asking $5,000 for the whole operation. Truck, routes, customer list, everything. My heart sank. Harold, we only have $4,000 saved. I know, but listen to this. Pete says if we can give him $2,000 down and promise to pay the rest over 2 years, he'll make the deal. I stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. You mean we could actually own something? Not just own. It, Dorothy. Build it. Make it bigger. Better. That night, we sat at our kitchen table and made a plan that would change our lives forever. We would buy Pete's delivery business, but we wouldn't stop there. We'd expand it, maybe buy another truck, hire some help, and eventually supply groceries to the whole town. My family thought we were crazy when we told them. A delivery business? Margaret shrieked. Dorothy, you'll be nothing more than a grocery. Boy. At least it's honest work, Charles said dismissively, though I can't imagine you'll make any real money at it. But we didn't care what they thought. For the first time in our lives, Harold and I were working towards something that belonged to us. The first year was brutal. Harold would drive this delivery truck all day, and I would handle the books, take orders, and help load groceries when needed. We worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Our hands were raw, our backs ached, and we were exhausted, but we were building something. And slowly, incredibly, it started to work. Word spread about our reliable service and fair prices. Mrs. Johnson on Oak Street started recommending us to her friends. The Reverend at St. Mary's Church began ordering supplies for church functions, through us. By the end of our first year, we'd not only paid Pete his money, but had enough profit to buy a second truck. My family barely noticed. They were too busy with their own lives. Margaret's social committees, Charles's banking career, William's new marriage to a judge's daughter. How's your little grocery business, dear? My mother would ask during our monthly visits, the same way someone might ask about a child's lemonade stand. It's doing well, I'd reply, not mentioning that we'd just landed a contract to supply 3 restaurants downtown. By 1960, we owned 4 delivery trucks and employed 8 people. We'd moved into a real house, nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable with a white picket fence and a garden where I could grow tomatoes. Harold had quit his job at the mill to focus full-time on the business, and I'd stopped taking in washing. But my family still saw me as poor Dorothy, the one who'd married beneath her station. I heard you finally moved out of that awful apartment, Margaret said during Easter dinner, though I suppose it's just a rental somewhere. Actually, we bought it. Harold said quietly. Charles looked up from his ham. Bought? How much could you afford? Some little place in the workers' district? It's on Cherry Street, I said. The conversation stopped. Cherry Street was where the mill supervisors lived. Not wealthy, but solidly middle class. Well, William said after a pause, I suppose that delivery business is doing better than we thought. If only they knew the truth. You see, while my family was focused on maintaining their social standing and spending their father's inheritance on appearances, Harold and I were quietly building an empire. We'd taken that little delivery business and expanded it beyond anyone's imagination. By 1965, we owned not just delivery trucks, but 3 grocery stores. By 1970, we'd bought the warehouse that supplied half the county. By 1975, we owned the trucking company that delivered goods throughout the state. And we kept every bit of it secret from my family. Why? Because every family gathering had become an exercise in subtle cruelty. They'd developed a pattern of polite condescension that cut deeper than any outright insult. Dorothy, dear, you look tired, my mother would say. All that manual labor must be so exhausting. It's honest work, I'd reply. Of course it is, Margaret would chime in. We're not judging you. Some people are meant for simple lives. Charles would nod sagely. The important thing is that you're happy with your situation. Harold and I would exchange glances across the table, knowing that our situation was generating more income in a month than any of them made in a year. But we kept quiet. We lived modestly, drove regular cars, and wore simple clothes. We were building something bigger than their small minds could comprehend. The real turning point came in 1978. William had gotten himself into financial trouble. His gambling debts had piled up, and he was facing bankruptcy. The family rallied around him, each contributing what they could to help him save face. Of course, we can't ask Dorothy to help, Margaret said during a family meeting I wasn't invited to but heard about later. She and Harold are doing well enough with their little business, but they certainly don't have the kind of money William needs. The kind of money William needs was $50,000, exactly what Harold and I spent on lunch that week, while negotiating the purchase of our 5th grocery store. But they never asked us. They assumed we couldn't help. Instead, they mortgaged their homes, sold their stocks, and liquidated their savings to bail William out. It was noble in a way, but it left them all financially strained for the first time in their lives. Meanwhile, Harold and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary by buying a small hotel chain. Subscribe to hear how this story reaches its incredible conclusion. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. The years that followed were both the best and worst of our lives. Harold and I had built a business empire worth millions, but we watched my family struggle with money troubles they'd never experienced before. Charles had to take early retirement when the bank downsized. Margaret sold her jewelry to pay for her daughter's college tuition. William lost his house and had to move in with my mother. And through it all, they still treated me like the poor relation. Dorothy, would you like some of Charles's old clothes for Harold? My mother asked during one visit. Since Charles has lost weight, they might fit. We're fine, Mother, I said gently. Are you sure? I know times must be tight with the economy and all. If she only knew that I'd just signed a contract to supply groceries to every military base in 3 states. The final straw came in 1985. My mother was turning 80, and the family was planning a big celebration. Everyone was contributing. Money for a special birthday dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town. Everyone except me. We know you'd love to contribute, Dorothy, Margaret said over the phone. But we understand that money's probably tight. Just come and enjoy the dinner. Consider it our gift to you. Their gift to me. A dinner I could have bought the restaurant to cater. That night, Harold found me crying in our home office, surrounded by financial statements showing our company's profits for the quarter. More money than my entire family had seen in their lifetimes. "Dorothy," he said, sitting beside me, "maybe it's time they knew." "Knew what?" "Who you really are. What we've really built." I shook my head. "They'll think we were hiding it to hurt them." "Weren't we?" Harold asked gently. He was right, of course. After years of their condescension, there was a part of me that enjoyed having a secret they couldn't imagine. But it had also isolated me from the family I still loved, despite everything. "What do you suggest?" I asked. Harold smiled, the same smile that had convinced me to marry him 40 years earlier. "I suggest we give your mother a birthday gift she'll never forget." The dinner was held at the Grandview Country Club, the most exclusive restaurant in our city. My family had pooled their resources to afford a private dining room, and everyone was dressed in their finest clothes that were noticeably showing their age. I arrived wearing a simple black dress and pearls, the same style I'd worn to family gatherings for years. Harold wore his good suit, the one we'd bought for church. We looked exactly like the struggling couple they expected us to be. "Dorothy, Harold, so glad you could make it," Charles said, shaking Harold's hand with the subtle condescension I'd grown to hate. "I hope the drive wasn't too expensive. Gas prices these days." "We managed," Harold said mildly. The dinner proceeded exactly as expected. My family told stories about their younger days, when money was easier and dreams seemed possible. They toasted my mother's health and longevity, and everyone took turns sharing memories. When it came time for gifts, I watched my siblings present their offerings: a lovely scarf from Margaret, a framed photograph from Charles, a small jewelry box from William. "And what about you, Dorothy?" my mother asked kindly. "Did you bring something?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a simple envelope. "It's not much," I said, handing it to her. "Just a little something Harold and I wanted to share." My mother opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Her face went white. "What is it, Mother?" Margaret asked. My mother's hands were shaking as she passed the paper to Charles. He read it, blinked, and read it again. This can't be right," he stammered. "What can't be right?" William demanded, grabbing the paper. The room fell silent as the truth sank in. The paper was a bank statement. Not for a personal account, but for Henderson Enterprises, the holding company Harold and I had created to manage our various businesses. The balance showed $37 million. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the list of subsidiary companies attached to the statement. Companies they all recognized. Companies they all depended on. Charles worked part-time consulting for Morrison Financial Services. We owned Morrison Financial Services. Margaret bought her groceries at Thompson's Market. We owned Thompson's Market. William rented his apartment from Hillside Property Management. We owned Hillside Property Management. My mother received her pension checks from First National Bank, where Charles used to work. We, for 30 years, while they had been condescending to me about my little delivery business, I had been quietly building an empire that touched every aspect of their lives. I was their landlord, their banker, their grocery supplier, their employer. I was the reason they could afford to live the way they did. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, Margaret found her voice. You own all of this?" "Harold and I built it together," I said simply. "Starting with that delivery business you all thought was so beneath me." "But why didn't you tell us?" William asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, faces showing shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. Owned controlling interest in First National Bank. "When would I have told you?" I asked quietly. When you were explaining that I'd married beneath my station, when you were offering me your cast-off clothes, when you were telling me that some people are meant for simple lives. Charles cleared his throat. Dorothy, we didn't know. No, I interrupted. And for the first time in my life, my voice was strong and clear in that room. You didn't know because you never asked. You never asked about my dreams, my plans, my successes, or my struggles. You assumed you knew everything about my life based on appearances. Harold reached over and took my hand. Dorothy has been supporting this family for years without any of you realizing it. When the bank needed capital to stay afloat during the recession, it was her money that saved it, and Charles's job. When the grocery stores in this town were about to close because they couldn't compete with the big chains, it was Dorothy who bought them and kept them running. When William needed an affordable place to live, it was Dorothy who made sure the rent stayed low. My mother was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We were so wrong, so cruel." I stood up from the table, still holding Harold's hand. "I didn't tell you this to hurt you," I said. "I told you because I wanted you to understand something. Success isn't about having the right connections or the right education or coming from the right family. It's about having the courage to dream bigger than other people think you should, and the determination to make those dreams real." Margaret was staring at the bank statement like it might disappear if she looked away. "All these years," she said, "we thought we were better than you. You were never better than me," I replied, "but I was never less than you either. We're family. That's all that matters." Before you go, make sure to subscribe to our channel. These stories of family, forgiveness, and unexpected triumph are what we're all about. The aftermath of that dinner changed everything for our family. It wasn't easy. There were hurt feelings, difficult conversations, and a lot of apologizing on both sides. But for the first time in 40 years, my family saw me as I really was. Not poor Dorothy who married the mill worker, but Dorothy Mae Henderson, successful businesswoman and matriarch of a financial empire. More importantly, they began to understand that success comes in many forms, and that the person you underestimate might just be the one who surprises you the most. Harold and I spent our remaining years together traveling the world and giving back to our community. We established scholarships for young entrepreneurs, funded a community center in the old neighborhood where we started our business, and taught anyone who would listen that with enough determination and love, any dream is possible. Harold passed away in 2003, but not before seeing our business grow into one of the largest privately held companies in the state. I continued running it until I was 85, when I finally decided it was time to step back and let the next generation take. Laura, my family never again questioned my choices or assumed they knew better than I did about my own life. And every Christmas, when we gather for dinner, someone always tells the story of the night Grandma Dorothy revealed her secret empire. It's become our family legend, the reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that love and determination can overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the person who seems to have the least actually has the most to give. The moral of my story is simple. Never judge someone based on their circumstances, because you never know what they're building behind the scenes, and never give up on your dreams, no matter how impossible they seem to others. After all, they called me the family disgrace, but in the end, I became their greatest blessing.